Hey Wally, how you doing? I'm cool, Barry. You know DC Comics is making a Crisis of Infinite Earths movie, and it's supposed to be so epic it goes over the course of 3 movies. Well, I've been to the future, Barry, and that future ain't too great for DC Comics. I mean, how do you give the entire Crisis a complete runaround by taking it over to the Tomorrowverse, where they only had 3 years to build a universe, and then on top of it, you've got Wally West, who's barely 13 years old, when I was 20 in the original Crisis of Infinite Earths. And I'm supposed to take over as the Flash, but how can I do that if I'm a preteen and the Titans haven't even been formed? Well, I don't know. I mean, I thought this movie was going to be epic. Yeah, it's going to be an epic mess. And like Black Panther on Earth M says, you should not have made this movie! You should not have made it! You should not have made it! Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new Isis series adventure. Get your copy of Isis, Dark Incubus in paperback and e-readers today. Better get the coleslaw, y'all, cause we're having us a barbecue. I got a chance to take a look at Crisis of Infinite Earths Part 1 on Max. Now, Crisis of Infinite Earths Part 1 is part of a 3-part trilogy of direct-to-video movies that are an adaptation of the 1986 maxi-series event, Crisis of Infinite Earths. Now, Crisis of Infinite Earths in 1986 was a major event for the DC Universe, and it was a direct response to Marvel Comics' Secret Wars, which was extremely successful as an event to get new readers to go pick up Marvel Comics. Now, for DC, they wanted to try to fix their continuity, which they believed was a problem with DC having a hard time getting sales in the early to mid 80s, where many of their books were not selling very well, and many in editorial at DC Comics believed the reason why DC Comics weren't selling was because many of the DC books had a very what they believed to be confusing continuity, with the DC heroes on Earth 1, the Golden Age heroes on Earth 2, and the Shazam characters on Earth, I believe Earth S or something like that, and the bad guys being on Earth 3, the Crime Syndicate, and they believed that all of this was very confusing. However, as a kid, I was never confused, but DC editorial thought that this was a problem. It was leading to them having slow sales, so what they did was create this event to try to streamline the DC universe so more books would sell better than what was selling very well for them at the time, which was the new Teen Titans, The Fury of Firestorm, and Batman. Those were the only 3 or so books, plus maybe Blue Devil here and there, that were doing well for DC. So what they wanted to do was streamline the DC Universe continuity to make it more easy to follow. And that's what they wanted to do as related to the DC comic book universe. However, this attempt to adapt the Crisis for this new Tomorrowverse, which was just established about 3 or 4 years ago, basically fails. And it fails because the Tomorrowverse doesn't have enough structure to wrap the form of an epic event like Crisis of Infinite Earths around it. Because when it comes to the Crisis of Infinite Earths as related to the Tomorrowverse, again, there's not enough structure as related to continuity to create an event like this in this universe. And as a result, what we get as related to this adaptation of Crisis of Infinite Earths is a very shallow adaptation that features one-dimensional characters and a flat presentation of the story that really does not capture the heart and the spirit of what made this event an epic one for 1986. Now, when it comes to the Crisis of Infinite Earths, this would have been a better adaptation had they did it with the Timverse, which already has over 20 years of history and 20 years of continuity, starting back in 1992. I'm going to correct myself, it's 30 years of continuity, because in 1992, we got Batman, the animated series. In 1995 or 1996, we got Superman, the animated series. We had 1999's Batman Beyond. We had, I believe, 2000's Justice League, and then 2002 or 2003's Justice League Unlimited. And we also had Static Shock as well in 2001. And with all of these shows, we had a huge continuity that spanned free TV, cable TV, and was a big hit on DVD for many viewers. So you had a big universe of characters that people had an emotional investment in. And as they had this emotional investment in that universe, there would have been an easy way to answer the critical question as related to the earth-shattering event of Crisis of Infinite Earths, and that is, why should we care? That's the question a screenwriter would have to answer regarding writing an epic event like Crisis of Infinite Earths, and the Timmverse would have been the perfect place to answer that question, with it already establishing alternate universes with the Justice Lords, establishing alternate universes with adaptations of Golden Age characters as related to that episode featuring the Streak and the Green Guardsman. Again, you would have had the universe that people would have had an emotional and personal connection to make people care. Unfortunately, the Tomorrowverse is just too young to be able to build an event like this, because with the Tomorrowverse only being 3 years old, the Tomorrowverse doesn't have enough structure to wrap the form of an event like Crisis of Infinite Earths around it. Because on this world, Bruce Wayne doesn't even have his partner Robin yet, and in this world, we don't even see the establishment of the foundation of the Justice League, and we don't really see this world establishing enough of its heroes to create a world large enough to make people care. So when I look at this whole Crisis of Infinite Earths adaptation, again, it really comes across as shallow, flat, and one-dimensional, and doesn't really have that scope to really connect you with these characters and make you care about them the way people did about the Timmverse. And that's what that really messes up the writing here, which comes across as really, again, flat, shallow, and one-dimensional as related to the story. And Crisis of Infinite Earths Part 1 really lays a weak foundation for a trilogy of movies that I believe are going to fall flat, because there is, again, not enough story to invest you emotionally with characters you barely know. I mean, we barely know characters like the Green Lantern, John Stewart, who was in one direct-to-video movie. We barely know the Wonder Woman of this world. We barely know the Superman of this world. I mean, we barely know any of these characters, but you want to throw them into a major event, and that really shows the just incompetence of this executive who came up with this whole proposal and did not really think, hey, maybe we should start with maybe a Justice League formation movie with adding up a character like Despero or one of these other characters and make that the center focus. But no, what they want to do is just try to clear the board for James Gunn's DC Universe, and that's a major mistake, because what you're doing is just throwing good money after bad on an absolutely terrible start of a trilogy of terrible movies. And this movie is just completely terrible, because what they do is introduce us to their version of Barry Allen, and as they introduce us to their version of Barry Allen, they make him the center of the story, which is standard for screenwriters, but the whole thing is his character really doesn't get that much development over the course of this movie, and many of the other characters don't get much development because they have to move this movie along at a rapid pace to introduce the whole crisis as related to affecting all of these Earths. And the crisis doesn't really feel like a crisis. It just feels, again, like a Cliff's Notes version of the crisis. And it feels like a Cliff's Note version because we get introduced to lots of characters that comic fans know, but we don't really get to know people in this story. And that's what made the original Crisis a masterpiece, is that we knew all of these people growing up. We got to know all these people and how their lives were were out here, and it was the scary part was all of these people's lives were no longer going to exist, and we were going to see these characters basically fighting for their life against a force that they possibly could not fight against. I mean, that's what was made the Crisis the event of 1986. It made it an event because it just was so epic. But the whole thing is we don't get that epic feel in this, just again, abbreviated Cliff's Notes version of Crisis of Infinite Earths. No, what we get is underdeveloped characters, underdeveloped story, and things just, again, haphazardly thrown together without any sense of making the events move together organically to create a compelling story. And as Barry Allen runs through time, and we see him running through time, we don't really get that sense of urgency as the original Crisis had, as related to these waves basically destroying entire Earths as throughout the multiverse. And the entire multiverse aspect of the storyline doesn't really give you that sense of urgency and epicness and that whole sense of frustration and trepidation, because here we have characters with powers, and again, we don't get that reason to connect with them and see why their world is special. I mean, they start out by showing us the crime syndicate's world being destroyed, but there's no real emotional connection to those characters, and it just doesn't work overall. Now, one of the issues I have with Crisis of Infinite Earths Part 1 is that they do a lot of just butchering of these characters. I mean, I wasn't happy to see the race swap Wally West or the other characters that were just completely changed as related to this story. I mean, that made things even weaker as related to this already fragile universe. I mean, they go out here and they take liberties with characters. I mean, you have Bruce Wayne, who's out here acting out of character, talking about how he wants to go to Barry Allen to just pass Dick Grayson off because he doesn't want to take care of a child, when that was never the case when it came to Bruce. No, Bruce cared for Dick because he saw Dick in himself, and he was looking out for Dick because he cared for Dick. So that was really another point that I had an issue with this story. Again, the complete butchering of characters, and butchering of characters to either meet social justice narratives like the, again, Black Wally West, or you had characters who were just, and the Black Iris West, again, I just had an issue with that. And I also had an issue with, again, the way they just handled Batman. But the most egregious thing they ever did was with the Golden Age Superman. Now, the Golden Age Superman is a gray-haired, older version of Superman. And in this version, they go out and have him in a relationship with the Wonder Woman of Earth 2, which has just never happened. No, the Earth 2 Wonder Woman had gray hair, just like the Golden Age Superman, and the Golden Age Superman was married to Lois Lane. That was a major component of the Crisis story, because Earth 2 was the place where all the Golden Age heroes were, and with Earth 2 being the place where the Golden Age heroes were, that's what had the most emotional resonance, because these were the original versions of the DC Comics characters. These were the original versions of the DC Comics characters that people formed emotional connections with for the last 50 years of the DC universe when it first came out. And this was the thing that really gave the Crisis of Infinite Earths its heart, was the Golden Age Superman basically having his world being put at risk, and the whole history of the DC universe being put at risk. That was the core component of what made Crisis the major event, because the Golden Age Superman was the heart and soul of DC Comics. The Golden Age Superman was the foundation of DC Comics. I mean, he was the first hero of DC Comics, but this Crisis treats him like an afterthought to give us Barry Allen and his story. Now, I know Barry Allen's story is important to the Crisis because of his sacrifice as related to the series, but you cannot go out and leave the Golden Age Superman in the background of your story if you're really going to tell the story of the Crisis of Infinite Earths. That's just plain bad writing all around, and it just really destroys the entire second to third act, where the entire structure of Crisis of Infinite Earths falls apart, that's where Crisis of Infinite Earths just completely implodes as related to its story. And this first act of a trilogy just comes across as extremely weak because it doesn't really, again, understand the whole scale of the DC universe or the scope of the DC universe in using a universe that really is not strong enough to hold up this structure. And that's why the whole thing completely implodes, because the structure of the DC universe, again, you need a world that is huge, a world that is epic, a world that can just really just grab you like and your heart. And the world that did this for as related to the DC universe really was the Timverse. And again, without the craftsmanship of men like Rick Burchett, Paul Dini, Bruce Timm, and the late great Dwayne McDuffie, you don't have the architects to go and be able to build a structure of a world strong enough to be able to establish the Crisis of Infinite Earths. No, the people who run the Tomorrowverse just don't have enough experience to be able to craft this kind of story, and that's why Crisis of Infinite Earths Part 1 falls flat. Now, I hear a lot of people, they want to say that Crisis of Infinite Earths was a great movie, but if you're a true-to-the-game DC Comics fan like myself, when you look at this shallow, flat, one-dimensional adaptation, you see something that really should not have been made, because with the Crisis of Infinite Earths, this crisis just shows the crisis at DC Animation as related to the competency of the talent, because this movie basically was just not good enough from the development stage, because if you have any understanding of how to craft a world or build a universe, you know that you need a lot of time to build the universe so people can have an emotional investment in it. And a world like the Tomorrowverse, which was made on direct-to-video, shown to limited audiences, that world wasn't big enough to make the audience care. And when I look at this whole Crisis of Infinite Earths, I said from minute one it was going to be a disaster, but this is just proving how much of a disaster it is when you have inexperienced people working behind the scenes. When you have inexperienced people working behind the scenes, they really don't take care of the source material. They don't really do enough research on the source material to show you the scale and scope of that universe. Here we have a universe where we don't even have the Teen Titans or Blue Devil established, and you're going to build a crisis around it when Titans was a major player in that universe. Cyborg was a big player in that universe. I believe Raven was a big player in the universe, along with Earth 2 Robin and the Huntress, and many other characters. There's not even a Lady Quark in this thing, and it's just, again, lots of characters basically taken off the table, and those characters were major players. It really was not done well at all. And when I look at Crisis of Infinite Earths, the Part 1, I see the first part in showing me the mess that currently is in Warner Brothers management, and shows me why the crisis at Warner Brothers really led to the creation of this crappy movie. Now, if you want to pick up my first full comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, you can find that comic on Lulu.com right now, and you can be able to pick up a paper copy for the same price as the 2022 Kickstarter. And if you want to pick up my first digital comic, A Steam No Good Deed, you can find that comic on Kindle for 99 cents. And if you want to pick up the action-packed fantasy fiction of the SJS Direct Universe, you can find the books of the ISIS series, the Steam series, the John Haynes series, the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, my vampire novel Eternal Night, my black sorority novel The Thetas, and my black business novel Recipe for Success. You can find all those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online booksellers like Draft to Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, and Target. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and coming to Kindle Unlimited. John Haynes, Dark Succubus. The man who rules the world is tempted by a sultry succubus in this all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get John Haynes, Dark Succubus in paperback or pre-order on Kindle Unlimited today. Now available in paperback and e-readers. ISIS, Amari's Revenge. The goddess next door is confronted by a Nubian queen out for revenge at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in this inaugural ISIS series adventure. Get your copy of ISIS: Amari's Revenge in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.